We're in part 2 of Principality of Self-Bitterness, and this is definition of self. Let's start by defining the term self. The dictionary definition is one's own person, an individual. In Romans 7, Paul teaches about the two different parts of self. Paul said that there was a part of him that was good and a part of him that was sin. Romans 7 verse 18 says, "For I know that in me, that is, in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not." These are strong words. In my flesh dwelleth no good thing. Paul speaks here of his carnal, sinful, Adamic nature. He adds, "For to will is present with me." The verb used here is to will. It means to choose. What he describes is making a quality choice, a choice with which Paul admits he struggles. For to will is present with me, but how to perform that which is good I find not. Romans 7:18. Romans 7:19-20 says, "For the good that I would I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. Now if I do that I would not, it is no more I that do it, but sin that dwelleth in me." It's vital to understand this. Verse 21 says, "I find then a law, that when I would do good, evil is present with me." Does Paul's self include both the good and evil parts? Do you think that Paul claims that he is partly good and partly evil? No. Paul plainly states that it is not I that sin, but that the sin dwells within me. The sin that dwelt within Paul was the flesh, or the Adamic nature. It was not Paul, nor you or me, that is sin. Sin is not part of our original creation or nature. It was added by Satan at the fall. We are not evil. When we sin, we must take responsibility for our actions, but we are not those actions. What is a law? Romans 7:7 says, "What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, Thou shalt not covet." God's law has never been, nor will ever be, a curse, if it is applied as He intended. His laws have been given to show us our sin. Thus we are able to recognize our sin, and then we are able to sanctify ourselves by forgiving others and asking God to forgive us. This is the process of purging ourselves of all iniquities. 2 Timothy 2, verse 20 to 21. Verse 16 says, "If then I do that which I would not, I consent unto the law of Satan, that it is good." In other words, when I choose to do something evil, even though I know it is evil, I am calling evil good. In verse 21 he says, "I find then a law, that when I would do good, evil is present with me." Paul is saying that there are two laws working within him. One is the law of sin, and the other the law of God. A biblical law is a precept or concept by which one ought to live, a standard. Paul says that residing within him are two opposing ways of thinking. One way loves God and desires to serve him in righteousness. The other way responds to a different law than God's law. It presents a different word, precept, concept, or suggestion that entices me to follow it instead of God's law. By following this law of sin, I am saying to the law of sin, you are good. I am saying to the law of God, you are evil. Both laws establish within us a code of thoughts, words, and actions. Attitudes are detained as habits of thought. So both legal codes promote their own set of attitudes. We follow one for the other. This is how spiritual warfare plays out in our lives. Do we follow God's law or a law that is anti-God, the law of sin? Paul emphasizes this writing. I find then a law that when I would do good, evil is present with me. For I delight in the law of God after. After what? After the inward man. The inward man is a real, very real part of him. It was part of his original creation. It is the nature of God that was born again in Paul when he made Jesus his Lord and Master. The inward man, or his new nature, is why the new covenant is better than the old covenant. There is, however, another part of him described in verse 23. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. He sees another, different law in his members that wars against the law in his mind, bringing them into captivity to the law of sin. He places the location of the law of sin in his members. This should be the real teaching in Psychology 101, not the pagan notions one usually hears. There is a battle between good and evil inside of each of us, but they are not equal. Paul's explanation provides the truth-based alternative to psychotherapy. Man struggles against two kingdoms, the kingdom of God and the kingdom of sin. This is a clear statement about the need for mature spiritual discernment. Understanding and applying this truth brings victory over mental disorders, panic attacks, depression, and all manner of struggles that war in our minds and bodies. When we learn to wage this war in our minds and bodies with God's tools, we have victory. Excuse me. Jesus came to deliver us from the bondage of sin, but obedience is required on our part. The dictionary further defines self as by its self, or separate. A self is a separate, unique identity. Each of us is separately and uniquely different, and we stand alone as individuals. Psalms 139 says that God made each of us fearfully and wonderfully. Even before conception, God saw how our parts and our pieces fit together. This included our body, soul, and spirit. My substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret, and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Psalms 139, verse 15. God knew our ancestry and our offspring before we ever actually came to be. God knows each one of us as unique individuals, separate and different from anyone else. Believers know that their name is written down in the Lamb's Book of Life. Our separate individual identity is already recorded in eternity. This is further proof of our individuality in God's eyes. 1 Corinthians 13 verse 12 says that in that day you shall be known as you are known. To win our battles against disease and Satan, we need to truly understand how important each of us is to God. And I'll close there, and I'll come back with part 3.